So I'm thrilled to welcome Teresa Amabile, Lotte Bailyn, Marcy Crary, Tim Hall, and Kathy Kram to the Collective Edge. They are professors emeriti, something like that, at Harvard, MIT, Bentley, and Boston University times two, respectively. And we today are excited to talk about their fabulous book, Retiring. And so I wanted to start out just why you wanted to write a book about retiring. So, Teresa, can you tell us a little bit about why you wanted to write a book about retirement?
I had a few motivations, Colin. Well, the main motivation is that this incredible team of five colleagues did a decade-long study of the retirement transition, and we wanted to get it out in a form that would be useful to the general public. We think we've got some findings that are really going to be helpful to people. We've written a few scholarly articles throughout the course of the time that we were doing this research, but we know that real people don't usually read those. So we thought that the book would be the best way to put it all together. My own personal motivation for doing the research initially came from something that was bothering me after I finished my last big research project on the progress principle. And that was the main finding of that research was that of all the things that happen in a workday, the one that can lead to the highest level of intrinsic motivation and positive emotion and positive perceptions of the work environment and colleagues and self, the single most important thing is making progress in meaningful work. And that has all kinds of synergistic effects for creativity and productivity. And I began to wonder what happens when meaningful work goes away. Many of us are fortunate enough to do work that we find very meaningful. But what happens when it ends? And that was the big motivation initially, but also at that time, you could see the color of my hair. I was thinking about my own retirement and looked into the literature to see, all right, what can I learn about this question that was bugging me? And I found almost nothing on the actual psychological experience of retiring. So that led to wanting to do research on it, and I was foolishly initially planning on doing it solo, but heard from a mutual friend of ours, Michelle Barton, who was then at Boston University with Tim Hall, that Tim was interested in the retirement transition. He had just written a chapter with a doctoral student. So I asked him for a meeting, and he said, sure. Can I bring my colleague, Kathy Kram? She's also interested in this. We had a great conversation over lunch at an Italian restaurant right near the BU Business School, and got so excited that we decided to collaborate. Kathy then brought in Lotte, and Tim brought in Marcy. That's how we ended up with this incredible team doing this research.
That's great. I love the idea of, we're actually facing these things at work as people who study work, and we look in the literature and it's like, wait a minute, there's nothing here. What do I do? And so I love the answer that what you do in that situation is you go out there and you study it. So, Lotte, the next question's for you. One of the things that struck me in the book was how many of your interviewees seemed surprised about what retirement was really like. So it seems like people do have a lot of misconceptions, which is something that was so great about doing this research. What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions that people have about retirement? So you're muted, Lotte, right now.
We don't really have a realistic view of retirement. We have some mythical ideas. The golden years, we're either on a canoe in Squam Lake or we're in Florida playing golf. And on the very opposite end, this is the time when you can finally do good for the world, do somehow self-actualize in a way, and find meaning and purpose for the first time. And then on the completely negative side, all you do is deteriorate and die. And all of these are really mythical, and people tend to know they're mythical, even though there's some people who actually do each of those things, and it works out well for them. But on the whole, we found that people would say things like, I'm not going to Florida and play golf, or be a couch potato and watch. So I think the biggest impediment is that people don't know how to think about it. And that was really the goal behind our book, to give people a way of thinking ahead of time, not telling them what it's going to be like or what they should do, but what they should think about. And I want to read you for a minute a colleague of mine at Sloan. He's 55, and his wife's father had just died. So they were talking and discussing, really for the first time, he's not about to retire, what the long life would look like. And he read the book, and this is what he says. And it's just an excerpt. I just loved your book. I particularly liked the emphasis on life structure. That was a super helpful way of envisioning how we might spend our time and with whom and where. As a complete non-expert, this was the first time I had seen language that articulated what we were trying to discuss.
Mm.
Mm.
But I just add one thing. I love that quote. He sent it to both Lotte and me. And I love the phrase as a complete non-expert, because this is a star economist. And it's so unusual to hear an economist say, I'm a complete non-expert at anything. So it was just delightful to get that note.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. So I like something else, this notion of structure that comes up so much in the book, and is such a big theme. And that one aspect of that, like as you were reading that quote, is this idea of with whom am I going to spend my retirement? And that one of the quotes that I like the most from the book was, retirement is not a solo act. And that, as most of you guys know, groups and teams are a big passion of mine and a big interest of people who visit this blog, newsletter, podcast, whatever this is. So Tim, can you tell us a little bit about what the role of groups or group dynamics are in how and when you retire?
Well, I think a lot of it is in the notion of life structure that Lotte just mentioned, that the life structure is all the contexts that we have that make up our life, and it consists of groups and organizations and different memberships we have, as well as activities and places. And so I think people may underestimate the importance of group identifications they have. They may think of individuals. For myself, for example, one of my biggest obstacles to retirement was I felt so identified, so close to my friends and colleagues in BU in our department. You were part of that column along with Kathy, and I really felt, well, those are my friends, and those are my only friends. And I've been thinking more in terms of individual relationships, but pulling back a little bit, as we think about it, it's really the group. It's the professional identification there. And Marcy and I used to do workshops on retirement, and when I would draw, we'd have people draw life maps, and in my life map, usually there would be two parts to it. There would be the BU School of Business on Commonwealth Avenue in Boston, and our house, which is just off Commonwealth Avenue in Newton, and family right there. And it was sort of like a barbell with two ends to it. And I was thinking, this BU part and all the affiliations I have there are so important. How am I going to replace that? What I hadn't realized was how many groups I was part of outside. So, for example, when I started doing more walking, which was a retirement activity, I kept bumping into neighbors that I knew, but they were sort of casual friendships. But I realized, oh, there's a group here of neighbors, and I feel part of that. That's a really important part of my life, and also family that we spent more time with. So I think those kinds of identifications are really important in not only how people make the decision, but also then how they implement it and how they kind of restructure a new life structure going into retirement.
Yeah, I mean it's so interesting how, retirement, as you say, it's not just it's both a letting go of some of these social identities and also now this sort of claiming and creating of new ones. So,
Mhm.
Kathy, did you also have similar experiences? What was your sort of experience of the creating and letting go of different groups in
Yeah, well,
retirement, and what did you
personally,
learn from this?
yeah, I did have those very similar experiences, but actually, I want to comment on what our participants
Yeah,
shared
please.
with us that
Yeah.
reinforced the idea that it's not just me, it's everybody finds themselves as they begin to approach the decision about retirement, that they either anticipate losing work colleagues, as Tim mentioned, or they discover that all of a sudden members of their family are wanting more time now that they know they're going to be retiring, like
Mm.
adult children who could use some babysitting support, or they find work colleagues not necessarily interested in connecting after they leave work, and so there's a big
Mm.
hole in their life. So essentially all the relationships you can imagine, and we all have them, get affected by this decision to retire. As the life structure of the individual changes, that impacts almost every relationship that people have. The other side of that is what you mentioned before, Colin, is social identities. You know, we asked people about how they saw themselves, and they would talk about seeing themselves as professionals, as a father. Some people had important hobbies like gardening or artistry, painting, or things like that. And in the process of going through that transition, some of those became more important and some became less important.
Mm.
And what we found is for those valued parts of self, inevitably our participants would seek ways to enhance that sense of self, either through new relationships or spending more time in certain relationships. I'm thinking of one of our people, Irene, who really prized herself as being a writer and an artist,
Mm.
but while she was working, didn't do much of that at all. When she retired, she thought she would do a lot of it. And then she discovered that her brother, who she loved, was moving near to where she and her husband were retiring. And so she started spending more time with him, and other relationships became more dominant. So that simple,
Mm.
not so simple, but that decision to retire sets in motion a chain of events that affects current relationships, lost relationships, and the opportunity to build new ones.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. And that, Marcy, I want to pick up with you on something else that Tim was kind of bringing up, that retirement we usually think of as sort of something about the future. It's a decision that we're making about what we're going to do next. But so many interviewees in the book talked about looking backward and claiming or reclaiming old identities, hobbies, and relationships. So, I mean, how do you make sense of this sort of simultaneously forward-looking and backward-looking nature of thinking about retirement?
Yeah, I think as everyone's been referring to in this dimension of back and forward, that is an essential kind of dynamic that's part of the transition. And I think I picked out some quotes I had noted about interviews, and I'm just going to name them. So one quote is, it blocks out the sun. So that's a reflection about a person's work, wanting to do something different, to not have the sun blocking them out. And the other one is, I don't think I judge myself by any of those things anymore. So it's a reflection of letting go of and having new ways to look at oneself. And the other one is, there are parts of me I've never explored. So this idea of what's unexplored and what is being re-explored is part of this process, I think. And the backward forward is, everyone has that. And the backward is often you're collecting ideas of, well, what was interesting to me in my past? What was brought me delight, or what was why intrigued, or what did I try and let go of? So it's the backward work is actually, I think, essential for this process. And some people, have already collected things they like to do that they're bringing into retirement, like the person who started playing music before he actually retired and re-energizing himself in relationship to bands. So this notion of forward and backward is like kind of like an essential dynamic, I think. And then, involved with letting go of some things in your journey of looking forward and backward. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And so many of these things that seem like people look backward at were things like playing music, like writing, these kind of more creative endeavors. And of course, that's a common interest of many of us here, none more so than Teresa. So, Teresa, how do you think creativity figures into retirement?
Wow. I have so many ideas about this, Colin. You and I have talked for hours and days in the many years we've known each other about creativity. Let me start by just describing one of the few quantitative findings that we include in the book, because we did collect some quantitative data along with our 215 interviews. We found that to the extent that people have work assignments that call for creativity in the final years of their career, they're likely to be more satisfied with their life in retirement. And that correlation was significant and much stronger than the correlation between creative activities outside of work before retirement and life satisfaction in retirement, which is what I expected. I thought, okay, if people have creative stuff going on outside of work, then they're more likely to just keep engaging in it and find satisfaction in that. That correlation was close to zero. So I think that, and I'm getting this from some of the interviews that we did, I think that if people can exercise their creativity and feel like they are contributing value and that their skills are being exercised right up until the last day of work, I think they're more likely to be able to leave their work as something that they've kind of wrapped up and put a bow on, and feel good about that, and feel really satisfied about moving into the next phase of life. That's not something that I can say we have quantitative data on or deep analyses of, but that's my speculation of what's going on there. So it's an important lesson for organizations, right? It's not only great for the organization to draw on people's creativity who have a lot of experience, expertise in the company, but it's also good for that person as they're on their way toward retirement. So I really hope that that's a lesson that organizational leaders will take from this, but also retiring people themselves to advocate for those kinds of assignments as they're approaching retirement. And yes, we found many people reviving or discovering new creative interests after retirement. Some of that involved problem solving. So we had one person we call Christopher, who got really engaged in a nonprofit oriented toward conservation and environment. He had been involved to some extent before retirement, but he loved contributing his creative ideas to what that organization might do. He got much more engaged with them after retirement. Person we call Edward had always loved music, and he joined 2 bands, I think, and a chorus after retirement, and that became a real passion for him, and his wife became involved in the chorus as well. So we saw creativity all over the place, both in the final years of the career, but also the early years of retirement.
Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting, and it's not exactly what I would have expected from this story of, oh, the people who, you know, were being creative in their work actually find it easier to let go. It seems like, you know, we know from what we know about intrinsic motivation and creativity, these might be the people who were holding on the tightest. So it's a really interesting finding. So I've got to ask, for all of you, have any of you picked up a new creative pursuit since you've retired?
Yeah, I actually have had a couple of experiences. First, I tried getting back to the piano, and I was excited about that. But I didn't stick with it because it felt too much like work to me. I was taking lessons, and rather than enjoy the creativity of it, I kind of said, I don't need this. But then I learned I was going to become a grandmother, so I took up knitting again. And I have made a blanket, I made a jumper. I am loving the artistic and creative work involved in that. And it's just so wonderful to not feel pressured. I can take as long as I want and express parts of myself that lay dormant for years. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, I can see why piano might feel like work with a son who's a professional jazz pianist. Were you taking lessons from Jason? Or did he refer you elsewhere?
No. But
No,
I may still get back to piano if I can let go of my high expectations and so on, and just do it for the joy. That would be my goal. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah, Lotte, you had something?
I've been doing a little bit of general writing, doing some workshops, a little bit memoir-like, a little poetry, a little just essay writing. I've enjoyed it.
Great, Lotte.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Teresa?
Mine is in writing too. A little bit of poetry, which I've enjoyed since I was a little kid, but more so, does this count? I think this counts as creative activity, writing opinion pieces and letters to the editor in defense of democracy and sending them to newspapers, national and regional newspapers, and
Good on you.
express myself that way.
That's great. Yeah, and I think if anyone gets to decide what counts as a creative endeavor, Teresa, it's you. So I don't think it's for us to tell you that. Yeah. Yeah. Tim?
I've always been interested in history, and I'm not sure I'd call this creative, and I'm not producing anything necessarily, but um, I've really been doing a lot of reading about the Civil War and the Reconstruction era and trying to apply it to what's going on today and
Mm.
trying to figure out, well, how did we get through such a terrible, wrenching experience in our country's history? In some ways, I think that was probably the most challenging time we've ever gone through, maybe even more so than what's happening right now. And so just always asking, well, what are some lessons here that we can pull out of this, apply to today?
Mm. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Marcy?
Well, in turn, I'm getting lots of lessons about the Civil War because Tim reads things and then
Yeah.
I get all sorts of stories. So I'm getting my knowledge of that time has really been it's been creative for me as a learner. I've been involved with a nonprofit down the hill here in Newton. It's an art culture center, and it's sort of both getting me involved in sort of all the organizational behavior challenges of being part of a nonprofit, which is sort of wonderfully crazy, and also being more connected to music, classical music performances, and some art exhibits there. Yeah, and then
Oh,
working with
that's
people.
wonderful.
Yeah.
That's great.
Colin, you might want to let me inform your readers or your listeners that that comment of Marcy's might be confusing unless people realize that Tim and Marcy actually live together.
Oh, so we're married.
They've been married for several decades.
Good point, Teresa.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good. That saves me having to cram that into their bios somehow in the there. That's great. So going back to the book, Marcy, it's step 3 in the process that you guys discovered was exploring, experimenting, and building a retirement life. And it sounds like you guys have all done so much of that. But it also sounds like that's a really important differentiator in how much people plan their retirements. So, what do you think is this role of planning in this exploring, experimenting, and building a retirement life process?
My read on that planning was not a differentiator. I mean, some people were doing anticipatory work, thinking about and planning very specifically. Others were not. But I didn't read that as affecting the quality of the outcome. But I wanted to bring up the 4 A's that we brought into the book
Mhm.
that are very much a part of this process. And I think relate to what Teresa's talking about in terms of creativity, that at the essence of this task of exploring, experimenting, the 4 A's were having a sense of your awareness of yourself, your own agency,
Environment.
yeah, your own, yeah, and the environment and other people's concerns or wishes, your sense of your agency, your sense of ability to be adaptable, in turn to find alignment between yourself and your life structure, and that's an ongoing process. So my favorite phrase for all this work is emergent design, and I think it is a creative task. I mean, this is a life creative challenge for designing your life in relationship to others and situations you're in. So I find myself personally not favoring the kind of kind of you should be planning kind of scolding that sometimes happens. I mean, the planning for financial resources is obviously critical, but I think for the design part of our lives, those 4 A's are really fun to highlight in this process.
Yeah, Teresa?
I love Marcy's answer and agree with it
Mhm. Yeah.
completely. the 4As really did make a difference in how smooth the transition people seem to have and how satisfied they were with their retirement life ultimately. But about planning, I would say, one of our big findings is that retiring takes work. It takes work to stop working. And that's why we talk about these phases as tasks. There are 4 tasks that you have to engage in. Making the decision to retire is task 1, and task 2 is detaching from work. Task 3 is what we've been talking about, experimenting, exploring, and building that provisional retirement life. And task 4 is consolidating a retirement life that seems to work for you from whatever provisional elements you are experimenting with. Although it doesn't seem to be necessary for people to plan in advance of retirement what exactly they're going to do with their time, it seems to me that our data do show that it's better for people to realize that although this work of retiring is work, and it can be very engaging and fun work, it does take time and attention and effort to have a smooth transition into a satisfying retirement life. So not to go into it blind, to realize that it is going to take work and that you will need to do some exploring and experimenting, trying out different elements, whether you start doing that before you retire or afterwards, to realize that it's there, that it's something that you will be engaging in, so that you don't feel, as one person put it, that facing retirement is like standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into a void. And we heard many, many people pre-retirement who were pretty terrified of the prospect of that void. So if you have a sense of what the work involves and realizing that you will be engaging in it, I think that can do a lot to relieve that fear.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And I think that clears up a lot of, something I was thinking about as I was reading the book about, the sense of, what you're calling it is exploring and experimenting, but this kind of stereotype we have about, you have to plan for retirement, that we get scolded by, commercials on TV and the financial planning industry all the time. But so as we sort of think about this idea of exploring and experimenting as you go into retirement, that obviously not planning things is a huge research interest of mine. And so, Tim, I wanted to ask you, do you think people can improvise their retirements? Can you explore and experiment without risking, people feeling like they're just blundering around in the dark or staring off the edge of a dark cliff?
I think if people do have some of the qualities of the 4As that we've just been talking about, especially a sense of awareness and adaptability, one of the possibilities is to plan not to plan, meaning to plan to allow yourself to be open to possibilities and just use that open space. One of our participants had a practice of discernment and meditation. It was part of his faith practice, and it was very important to him. And he had no plans for retirement. And Marcy interviewed him, I think, fairly close to the actual date of his retirement. And that first Monday, he was going to start meditating and really letting it emerge. And in fact, things happened. He became a grandfather. He was amazed at how important that was to him, how much he enjoyed it. His daughter asked for his help with babysitting on Fridays. And you could really see the interplay between changes in his life structure with the grandchild and the new time he had. He was part of a transition program that his company provided, where for a year and a half, people would work a 4-day week. So he had Fridays off and he used that Friday to experiment. So half of the day was meditation and discernment. The other half was spending time with his new grandson. And he realized he saw a change in himself, that he really, he didn't realize how much he was going to love this new person in his life and how much he liked himself in the role of grandfather. So you could see the interplay between the changes in the life structure and in the environment. So that just emerged. But he is someone, I think, who he was very self-aware. He was very adaptable and flexible and very self-directed, very agentic in his approach. And the result of all that work he did was it really helped him not only move into retirement, but it kind of developed his identity as a grandfather and added to his identity as the father of the baby's mother. And he became more active in his faith community. He moved into a leadership role. So all of these things reinforced one another, and none of them were planned. It was all improv in a sense.
Yeah, I love that phrase of planning not to plan. That's great, Tim. Yeah, Kathy, you had something to add?
I just want to modify what everybody's been saying or add to it, that although everyone we interviewed went through those 4 tasks, and most of them demonstrated awareness, adaptability, and alignment and agency, they did it in very different ways and in different time frames. So I just want to point out that while we found these commonalities, the uniqueness of each case, where some people were settled in a new life structure within a year, and other people took more than 5 years to get to a life structure, as we say in task force, that is quasi-stable and feels right for the moment. And so that allows for a lot of variation.
Yeah.
Everyone will face the same work, but how they go about it and at what timetable will be unique.
Great point.
Yeah.
And that's why we decided on the subtitle of the book that we have, Creating a Life That Works for You. And retiring takes work, but there is no single right way to do it.
No, that's great. So I'm gonna go a little out of order given what we're talking about right now. So given that we're sort of talking about all the ways that we can't distill this down into one set of prescriptions, I'm going to do the opposite and ask you what for one set of prescriptions. So Kathy, what advice do you have for those who are considering retirement?
Yeah, I think first and foremost is to recognize that financial planning, which most people do, is not enough, and that there's a whole lot of other work that needs to be done in the psychological and social realms. And in that regard, asking some basic questions of yourself, developing your awareness around what is it that's important to me at this stage of life? What would I like to try that I didn't have time to do for the last 30 or 40 years? Are there relationships that I just prefer to let go of, or are there people I'd really like to devote some time to getting to know? So a lot of it is around self-reflection. And what helps in that self-reflection is perhaps asking others one knows who's already made the decision to retire what the process was like for them. We can learn a lot from our peers, as I know from my own work on peer mentoring and so on, that there's a lot to be learned in listening to other people's story of how they approach this work.
Yeah,
So
or reading other people's stories.
Right, exactly. That's one of the values, I think, of our book.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And it come up a little bit earlier about maybe ways that managers or leaders of organizations can actually help people retire. So Lotte, do you have advice for managers or leaders of organizations to make the retirement process
And
better?
it's basically a rethinking of the value of their older employees, the ones who are about to retire. If they really realize how much experience, how much tacit knowledge these workers have, and to go back to Teresa's findings on creativity, and realize that they can benefit the organization if the organization is willing to provide the conditions that they need at the end of their careers, which is a good assignment, but probably also means different conditions of work, maybe more flexibility, less time. These phase down procedures are all very helpful. And the interesting thing that came out of the stories that people told about what their organizations did is that if they realized that succession is not only these are the specific roles, but here's the experience and the tacit knowledge that you're going to have to pick up. If they have this different view of older employees, they can help that transfer of that knowledge to the next people who are taking over. And on the whole, our people told us their organizations are typically not very good at that. And so I think that's the key thing, to see these people as valuable. It obviously helps them, as you know, they feel valued. They don't go out with a marginal job or a bad performance appraisal all of a sudden. So that's good, but it helps the organization. It helps the succession. It helps keeping the work going. So I think that's what's critical.
Yeah, no, it sounds like everybody benefits when organizations and leaders
Yeah,
are more thoughtful about this.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Teresa?
I just have one thing to add to Lottie's brilliant answer there. You know, most companies of moderate or large size now do have programs to help employees with financial planning for retirement. But what we discovered is people are craving more than that. They're craving programs to help them with the kinds of issues that we explored in this research, the psychological challenges, the relational issues, the life restructuring issues. We did see many creative ways that our participants dealt with all of these challenges, but it can be hard to see those ways to deal with these things when you're approaching the edge of that retirement cliff. And you know, we've discovered many different ways that people can deal with these challenges. I really wish that companies would think about offering programs to help people think through these kinds of things as well.
No, that's great. And that's a really important message that I hope gets out there from this. So we're almost out of time, and I want to ask you guys some questions about advice for aspiring writers and academics. So as I mentioned, many of our readers, listeners are aspiring writers and academics. So Tim, what are some of the things that you've learned about writing in academic careers through this or through any other experiences that you'd like to share with aspiring writers or academics?
Well,
Who
I've,
would you like to take that? Lottie's
Oh,
raised her
sorry,
hand.
yeah,
Let's let Lottie go.
I think to follow your passion and don't necessarily go the mainstream. That's a tough advice because People think as they're moving along, they have to do a certain kinds of thing, publish in certain ways. And of course, there's some truth to that. But any scholarship takes a lot of work and a lot of sit down and do it. And if it's not something that somehow fits into your passion, it's not going to be that enjoyable. B, it's not going to be creative. It's not going to lead to something that you can associate with yourself. So that's tough advice, I think.
Yeah.
Deal with subjects that are seen not as mainstream. But that's where the big advances are going to come from.
Yeah.
Might I add that that advice comes from someone who has been a spectacular scholar for about 70 years now.
And mentor to many.
Yeah. That advice from Lotte and Teresa feed into the answer as I was thinking about that. And that is not only really get clear on your passion and pursue that, because academic life is so challenging now, much more so than when we all were starting our careers. I think we were all fortunate to be born at the right time. It's so much more difficult now. So you were talking about the quote, retirement is not a solo act. Writing now is not a solo act. And so if you can not only pursue your passion, but pursue it with like-minded folks, people that you really trust, respect, and enjoy working with, that you have fun working together. It's hard enough. It does involve hard work. And so you might as well have fun while you're doing it and have company. And that gets us back to, what you were talking about at the beginning, Colin, of the importance of groups and teams. And for me, being part of this team, I really feel I learned how to write on this project. And I've done a lot of writing over the course of my career. And I've written a number of books. Some I've done sole authored and some collaboratively. And I could really see the value in this project of really tapping the skills of each individual member of the team and writing, publishing journal articles, publishing books. It's just so much more difficult than it was before. We worked with, we hired a consultant to help us with marketing and publicity for the book. You certainly also can hire people to help with the editing and the technical aspects, the research. We had great help from various folks at Harvard, research assistants of Teresa's who were marvelous. But when it came to the writing, I think that's when I learned the most, by working with these two people on the right side of my screen here, Lotte and Teresa. They were quite a pair, especially in terms of completing the work. We divided up the chapters. We had organization, ways of organizing for that. But the understanding was that Lotte and Teresa would do the final edits and writing. And Lotte was our hawk-eyed editor. When all the rest of us said, oh, this is perfect, she'll find a lot of things that need to be corrected. And Teresa kind of put her final polish on all the chapters so it was one voice and written in a very lively, personal way, which really fit, I think, the nature of our data with the stories that we had. So a lesson for me is the importance of collaboration and recognizing the importance of a lot of the different skills. And more, it's not just how how sharp you are as a psychologist or whatever your field is, but also how well you can communicate it and work with people who are really good communicators.
Yeah, no, it's great advice. Thank you, Tim. Yep. So, Kathy, Marcy, any further advice for aspiring writers or academics? Yeah,
Yes.
Marcy? Yeah.
Fatten your relationships. I mean, relationships are so important. I mean, Kathy's referred to the peer relationships, but that's also for me, the community, this community of writers and thinkers was an amazing experience. And you don't often have the luxury, the privilege of this kind of company and the support of an institution like Harvard for all the resources it gave us for 10 years. But we have those elements in our lives, that ability to build a good, positive, constructive community and have groups that have these norms that are non-hierarchical. And that's the critical thing, because in academia, the hierarchy seems to be becoming more and more important, or maybe it's always been. But the peer relationships where you can really be critical with each other. We've had some great fighting and biting in this team. I mean, I have really valued the conflicts we've had and what we learned from them. Because as academics, we come from different fields, we come from different value systems, we come from, different backgrounds. And when you put that stuff together and you create a space that is hospitable to those kinds of tensions and things, it's amazing. So you have to be willing to create the context for those kinds of relationships and the tugs and pulls that can be part of it, not just hang out with like-minded people.
Mm. Yep.
Yeah,
No,
I'd
it's great
like to,
advice. Yeah. Go ahead, Kathy.
I would definitely reinforce what Marcy just said, that up until working on this team, I had many collaborations, but it was mostly with people who were trained similarly to me, who came from similar disciplinary backgrounds. And in this team, it was very stretching for me to have to explain what seemed so obvious to me to other people for whom that wasn't a salient idea. Like, I knew from day one, relationships were key to understanding the transition experience. But I had to help us as a team ask the right questions in the interviews to get at that and to make sense of it. And each of us had our own niche that we brought to the building of the interview and the analytic approaches that we used. So we had a much richer product as a result of that diversity, if you will.
And it also helps to have a kick-ass leader like Teresa.
Yeah, well, so with that, I would love to keep talking to all of you all day, but I know we're short on time and that some of us have places to go and people to see. So with that, Teresa, you get the last word here. Any parting words for our audience that's partly composed of aspiring or earlier career academics and writers?
Oh, yes. Tim and I published a paper a few years ago while we were in the midst of this research about the value of what we call self-relevant research. So I would tell young researchers, don't be afraid to do research that is personally relevant to you. There's an entire issue of Academy of Management Perspectives on this topic, and the various articles in it show that this kind of research, if it's done rigorously, carefully, can create incredible value. I would also caution young academics against doing a longitudinal study that will require 10 years, to do. Just think carefully before you embark on something like that, before you have tenure. And I just want to reinforce what everyone else has said about the value of working with a wonderful set of collaborators. Marcy Crary brought to our conversations in the second or third year we were together the concept of life structure. And it was quite foreign to a couple of us. And it took her quite a while to convince us that it had value and that it was something we should really look at in our interviews and in our data analyses. Well, that ended up giving us the structure of the book, as well as the most important concepts that we developed. So I can't say enough about the value of a good collaboration. And I also want to just say that I love everyone on this team. And that has been a benefit far beyond the academic value of our research.
Amen.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you all so much for sharing these things. Again, the book is Retiring, Creating a Life That Works for You. So, Kathy Kram, Lotte Bailyn, Marcy Crary, Tim Hall, and Teresa Amabile, thank you all so, so much for joining us.
And
you.
thank you, Colin
Colin.
Fisher.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks.